At 11:47 p.m. on a rainy Thursday night in Tennessee, 42-year-old Lucas Miller received a text message from a number he didn't recognize. The message contained only one sentence. "I don't know what I'm going to do anymore. I think I've lost everything." Lucas stared at the screen for several seconds. He assumed someone had simply entered the wrong number. He could have deleted the message, gone back to sleep, and forgotten about it by morning. Instead, he typed 6 words that would eventually change his life. "I think you have the wrong number, but are you okay?" He had no idea who was on the other side of that screen. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she lived. He didn't know what had happened to her. And most importantly, he had no idea that this accidental message would eventually lead him toward a woman he would come to love, and a secret connected to the most painful loss his family had ever experienced. What happened next wasn't the kind of story Lucas could have planned, predicted, or explained. It began with 2 strangers who were never supposed to meet. A wrong number became a conversation. The conversation became a nightly routine, and that routine slowly became something neither of them was prepared to admit. For weeks, Lucas and the mysterious woman behind the number talked when the rest of Tennessee was asleep. They talked about loneliness, regret, family, failed relationships, and the things people usually keep hidden from strangers. They didn't begin with photographs or romantic promises. They didn't even know each other's full names. They simply talked. And sometimes, when 2 people are honest with each other before they know anything about each other's appearance, careers, or social status, something unexpected can happen. A connection can form before either person realizes how deep it has become. But there was something Lucas didn't know about the woman on the other end of the phone. She wasn't simply having a difficult night. She had been carrying a secret for years. A secret involving a tragedy in Tennessee that Lucas himself had never fully understood. And the closer the 2 strangers became, the closer Lucas unknowingly came to discovering the truth. By the time he finally learned who she was, the question was no longer whether a wrong number could lead to love. The question was whether their relationship could survive what happened before they ever met. And this is where the story becomes difficult to explain, because the first message really was sent to the wrong number. There was no carefully planned introduction, no dating up, no friend trying to set them up, no reason for Lucas Miller to ever have spoken to this woman. Yet one ordinary mistake placed 2 lonely people on the same conversation at exactly the moment both of them needed someone to listen. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The documented stories that inspire this kind of tale show just how strangely a wrong number can change someone's life. In one reported case, a woman named Casey Berg accidentally texted the wrong number while trying to reach a colleague, and the exchange eventually led to a relationship and marriage despite a significant age difference. In another widely reported case, Londoner Michael Evangela accidentally sent a WhatsApp message to Lena Dahlbeck, and their unexpected conversation eventually led to marriage only months later. But Lucas's story would take that familiar accident somewhere much darker and more emotional. Because unlike those simple coincidences, Lucas wasn't only going to discover love at the other end of the phone. He was going to discover a connection to his own past. That's life. +1. And at 11:47 that Thursday night, he knew none of it. All he knew was that somewhere in Tennessee, a woman he had never met was hurting. And for reasons even he couldn't explain, Lucas decided to answer. At 11:47 p.m. on a rainy Thursday night in Tennessee, 42-year-old Lucas Miller was sitting alone in his quiet house when his phone suddenly lit up. It was a message from a number he didn't recognize. Lucas almost ignored it. He had spent the day working, dealing with the ordinary pressures of life, and all he wanted was a few hours of peace before going to bed. But something about the message made him stop. It said, "I don't know what I'm going to do anymore. I think I've lost everything." Lucas stared at those words for several seconds. Clearly, the message had been sent to the wrong person. He could have deleted it without another thought. Instead, he typed, "I think you have the wrong number, but are you okay?" He didn't know it then, but that simple question would become the beginning of a relationship that would completely change his life. The response didn't come immediately. Lucas placed the phone on the table and walked into the kitchen. A few minutes later, the screen lit up again. "I am sorry. I must have saved the wrong number." Lucas smiled slightly and replied that there was nothing to apologize for. He expected the conversation to end there. Instead, another message appeared. "Thank you for asking if I'm okay. Nobody has asked me that tonight." Lucas stopped what he was doing. There was something different about that sentence. It wasn't the kind of thing someone usually sent to a stranger. He asked if she wanted to talk about it. She hesitated, then replied that she didn't even know why she was talking to him. Maybe because he was a stranger. Maybe because strangers couldn't judge her. Lucas understood that feeling more than she could have known. For the next hour, the two of them exchanged messages. She wouldn't give Lucas her real name. He didn't pressure her. She told him she was somewhere in Tennessee, but she wouldn't say exactly where. She told him she had been having one of the worst nights of her life. Lucas told her that sometimes the worst nights eventually become memories, even when they feel impossible to survive. She asked how he could say that with such confidence. Lucas admitted that he had experienced his own difficult years. He didn't explain everything. Not yet. He simply told her that life had taught him something important. People often believe they're at the end of their story when they're actually standing at the beginning of another chapter. The woman thanked him and said she wished she could believe that. Then, just before midnight, she sent one final message. "Good night, stranger." Lucas replied, "Good night. I hope tomorrow is better." He put his phone down and went to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. He kept thinking about the woman behind the number. He wondered what had happened to her. He wondered whether she was safe. Most of all, he wondered why a message intended for somebody else had ended up on his phone. By morning, Lucas had convinced himself that the entire thing was over. It had been an unusual conversation between two strangers, nothing more. But at 8:16 the next evening, his phone lit up again. "Are you there?" Lucas recognized the number immediately. He smiled before he even realized he was smiling. The woman apologized for messaging him again. She said she understood if he didn't want to continue talking. Lucas asked why she thought he wouldn't. She said most people didn't want to hear about somebody else's problems, especially someone they had never met. Lucas replied that maybe she had simply met the wrong people. She asked him what he meant. Lucas told her that sometimes the people who appear in our lives by accident end up becoming the people we remember forever. She didn't answer for almost 5 minutes. Then she wrote, "That's a dangerous thing to tell a lonely woman." Lucas laughed for the first time that day. That night, they talked until nearly 3 a.m. The conversation moved away from the mysterious crisis that had brought them together. They began talking about ordinary things. Favorite foods, childhood memories, music, places they wanted to visit. Lucas told her about Tennessee summers, long drives, and the quiet roads outside town. She told him that she loved rainy evenings because they made the world feel slower. Neither of them noticed how quickly the hours passed. They were strangers, but the conversation felt strangely comfortable. There was no pressure to impress each other, no pretending, no expectation. And perhaps that was why it became so easy for both of them to tell the truth. Over the next several days, the messages became part of Lucas's routine. He would wake up wondering if she had written. During lunch, he would check his phone. At night, he would wait for the familiar number to appear. He still didn't know her name, and she still refused to send him a photograph. Lucas respected that boundary. But there was one thing he began noticing. Whenever he asked about her past, she became unusually quiet. She could talk about almost anything except the years before they met. Whenever Lucas asked where she had grown up, she changed the subject. Whenever he asked whether she had family nearby, she gave him short answers. Then, one night, Lucas asked a question that changed the tone of their entire relationship. "Why are you so afraid of letting me know who you are?" There was no response. Lucas waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, his phone vibrated. I've learned that people can hurt you when they know too much about you. Lucas read the message twice. He asked who had hurt her. She replied, someone I trusted. That was all she would say. But Lucas sensed there was more behind those words. The following night, she finally agreed to tell him her first name. Hannah, she wrote. Lucas smiled. Hannah, he repeated quietly. For the first time, the woman behind the mysterious number had become a real person in his mind. He asked if Hannah was her real name. She said yes. Then she asked him something that surprised him. Lucas, if we ever meet, will you promise me something? He asked what? Don't decide who I am before you know what happened to me. Lucas didn't understand the request, but he promised. And that promise would later become one of the hardest promises he had ever tried to keep. Because Lucas Miller was about to discover that Hannah Reed had not entered his life simply because of a wrong number. There was a reason she had been afraid to reveal herself. And there was a reason she had chosen Lucas to hear the truth. At the time, Lucas thought he was simply helping a lonely stranger get through a difficult period. He didn't realize that the stranger on the other side of his phone was carrying a secret connected to a tragedy that had haunted his own family for years. And the closer Lucas came to Hannah, the closer he came to. By the second week, Lucas Miller had stopped thinking of Hannah Reed as a stranger. He still hadn't seen her face, he still didn't know exactly where she lived, and there were entire parts of her life she refused to discuss. Yet somehow, she had become part of his daily routine. Every morning, Lucas wondered whether she had slept well. Every afternoon, he caught himself thinking about something she had said the night before. And every evening, he found himself waiting for the familiar notification on his phone. Their conversations had changed, too. They no longer talked only about problems. They talked about dreams. Hannah told Lucas she wanted to visit places she had never seen, learn how to stop being afraid of the future, and someday wake up without feeling that something terrible was waiting around the corner. Lucas listened. He didn't try to fix her. Perhaps that was why she trusted him. One night, Hannah asked Lucas about his own life. For the first time, he told her about his divorce. He explained that his marriage had ended 3 years earlier after years of slowly growing apart. There had been no dramatic betrayal and no single moment that destroyed everything. They simply became two people sharing the same house while living completely different lives. Lucas admitted that after the divorce, he stopped believing that love was worth the risk. He had dated occasionally, but he never allowed anyone close enough to matter. Hannah asked whether he was lonely. Lucas initially avoided the question. Then he admitted, more than I want to admit. Hannah replied that loneliness wasn't always about being alone. Sometimes, she said, loneliness was being surrounded by people who knew your name but had no idea what was happening inside you. Lucas stared at the message for a long time because it described exactly how he felt. Their connection deepened without either of them making a conscious decision to let it happen. Hannah became the first person Lucas wanted to tell when something good happened. When a major contract finally worked out for his business, she was the first person he messaged. When his car broke down on a cold Tennessee morning, he told her about it before telling anyone else. Hannah laughed at his terrible jokes and teased him about how seriously he took his coffee. Lucas began teasing her about her habit of disappearing whenever he asked too many personal questions. But underneath the laughter, something was changing. The two strangers were becoming emotionally dependent on each other. Neither said the word love. Neither wanted to be the first. Yet there were moments when Lucas would look at his phone and realize that the person he had never met had become the person he trusted most. Then came the night Hannah finally agreed to speak to him on the phone. Lucas had asked several times, but she always refused. She said she wasn't ready. That evening, however, his phone rang. Lucas froze when he saw the unknown number calling. He answered cautiously. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then he heard her voice. Lucas. It was softer than he expected. Hannah sounded nervous, almost frightened. Lucas smiled. So you're real, he joked. She laughed, and that laugh immediately changed something between them. They talked for hours. The conversation felt different from their texts because now Lucas could hear every hesitation in her voice. When she talked about happy memories, her voice became lighter. When certain subjects came up, she became quiet. Eventually, Lucas asked why she sounded afraid whenever he asked about her past. Hannah didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "Because my past isn't finished with me." Lucas asked what that meant. Hannah told him that several years earlier, she had witnessed something that changed her life. She wouldn't explain exactly what happened, but she said somebody had been hurt and the truth had never completely come out. She had tried to move on, but certain people had made sure she understood that talking could have consequences. Lucas asked whether she was in danger now. Hannah said she didn't know. She only knew that she had spent years trying to remain invisible. She had changed parts of her life, stayed away from certain people, and avoided situations where someone might recognize her. Lucas told her she should contact the authorities if she was genuinely afraid. Hannah responded that she had already tried getting help once, and it had made everything worse. Then she asked Lucas to promise something. Never try to find her without her permission. Lucas agreed, but that promise would become increasingly difficult to keep. The following days were different. Hannah became more cautious. Sometimes she would disappear for several hours without explanation. Other times, she would send Lucas a message and then immediately delete it. Lucas began noticing small inconsistencies in her stories. She had once told him she had lived in Tennessee her entire life. Later, she mentioned a town several states away, as though she knew it intimately. When Lucas asked about it, she quickly changed the subject. He didn't accuse her of lying, but the question stayed in his mind. There was another strange detail. Hannah never used social media. She had no public photographs, no obvious online presence, and no friends Lucas could identify. In an age where almost everyone leaves some trace behind, Hannah seemed almost impossible to find. One Friday evening, Lucas asked her directly, "What are you running from?" Hannah didn't respond for several minutes. Finally, she wrote, "Someone who believes I know something I shouldn't." Lucas asked what she knew. Hannah said, "The truth about a night that destroyed several lives." Lucas felt a chill move through him. He asked whether the person she feared was still looking for her. Hannah answered, "I think so." Lucas wanted to ask more, but before he could, she sent another message. "Please don't ask me anything else tonight." Then she disappeared. Lucas respected her request, but he couldn't stop thinking about what she had said. A few days later, their conversations became lighter again. Hannah apologized for frightening him. She told him she didn't want their relationship to be built entirely around fear. Lucas told her that whatever had happened, she didn't have to face it alone. Hannah responded with something that Lucas would remember for years. "You say that like you're already part of my life." Lucas replied, "Maybe I am." There was a long silence. Then Hannah wrote, "That's what scares me." Lucas asked why. "Because I think I'm starting to care about you." Lucas read those words again and again. His heart was beating faster. He had spent weeks telling himself that this was simply friendship. But suddenly, he couldn't hide for what he was feeling. He cared about Hannah too, more than he wanted to admit. The woman he had never met had become the person he thought about before falling asleep, and the first person he wanted to hear from in the morning. But Lucas still didn't know the most important thing about Hannah. He didn't know her last name. He didn't know where she lived. And he didn't know that her real identity was connected to something buried deep inside his own family's history. Then, one night, Lucas received a message that made his entire world stop. "Lucas, I need to tell you something about your family." He immediately asked what she meant. Hannah didn't answer. Instead, she sent him a photograph. It was old. The image showed a young man standing beside a car. Lucas recognized him immediately. It was his younger brother, Philip Miller. Philip had died 17 years earlier. Lucas stared at the photograph in disbelief. Then another message appeared. "I was there the night Philip died." For the first time since their relationship began, Lucas didn't know what to say. The woman he had fallen in love with had just connected herself to the tragedy that had changed his family forever. And suddenly, the wrong number didn't feel like an accident anymore. Lucas Miller stared at the photograph for what felt like an eternity. There was no mistaking the young man standing beside the old car. It was Philip Miller, his younger brother, almost exactly as Lucas remembered him. 17 years had passed since Philip died, but Lucas had never forgotten his face. He remembered the way Philip laughed, the way he could walk into a room and immediately make everyone feel comfortable, and the plans he had for his future. Philip had been 24 when his life ended on a dark Tennessee highway. The official explanation had always been simple. A terrible accident. A wet road. A vehicle that lost control. A family grieving a young man who would never come home. Lucas had spent years accepting that explanation because there had never been anything else to believe. But now Hannah Reed was telling him something completely different. She had been there that night. She had seen something, and she had apparently been carrying the truth ever since. Lucas immediately called Hannah. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. He called again. Nothing. He sent message after message, demanding an explanation. Finally, almost 20 minutes later, his phone rang. Hannah's voice was trembling when she answered. Lucas didn't waste time. He asked why she had a photograph of Philip. He asked how she knew his brother. Most importantly, he asked why she had waited 17 years to tell him. Hannah remained silent for several seconds before saying something that hurt Lucas more than anything else. Because I was afraid of what would happen if I told you. Lucas asked what she meant. Hannah said she had witnessed something that night, something that convinced her Philip's death wasn't an ordinary accident. But before she could explain, someone had warned her to stay silent. Lucas felt anger rising inside him. He had spent 17 years believing his brother died because of circumstances nobody could control. Now someone was telling him that there might have been another explanation. Hannah began telling him about the night Philip died. She had been driving home after visiting a friend when she saw 2 vehicles traveling along the same stretch of road. She remembered the weather because rain had made the highway dangerous. According to Hannah, Philip's car was ahead of her. Another vehicle was following behind. She couldn't clearly identify the driver, but she remembered something unusual about the way the second vehicle was moving. It stayed close to Philip's car for several miles. Then, near a sharp bend, the second vehicle accelerated. Hannah said she saw Philip's car suddenly move toward the edge of the road. She heard the sound of tires losing traction, then watched the vehicle leave the highway. She stopped immediately and ran toward the wreck. Philip was still alive when she reached him. He tried to speak, but she couldn't understand everything he said. Then she heard another vehicle approaching. The driver stopped briefly, looked toward the wreck, and then drove away. Lucas asked why she hadn't told the police. Hannah said she tried. She told them what she had seen. But according to Hannah, her statement disappeared from the official version of events. Lucas couldn't understand how that could happen. He asked whether she had proof. Hannah said she had something, but she had spent years afraid to reveal it. Lucas demanded to know what it was. Hannah hesitated, then told him she still had the original photograph from that night. She had taken it before the police arrived. Lucas asked what was in the photograph. Hannah said it showed the vehicle that had been following Philip. Lucas's breathing changed. If the photograph existed, it could potentially prove that another vehicle was involved. But Hannah wasn't finished. She said there was another reason she had contacted Lucas in the first place. The night she accidentally sent that first message, she had been preparing to finally leave the past behind. She had been struggling with guilt for years. She knew Philip's family deserved to know what she had witnessed, but she was terrified of what telling them might unleash. Lucas asked her the question he had been avoiding. "Did you know who I was when you started talking to me?" Hannah didn't answer. Lucas asked again. This time she whispered yes. The silence that followed was devastating. Lucas realized that Hannah had recognized his name long before he understood who she was. She had known that the stranger answering her message was connected to Philip, but she had still continued talking to him. She had listened to his stories, laughed with him, allowed herself to become emotionally attached, all while carrying a secret she knew could destroy their relationship. Lucas felt betrayed. He told Hannah that she should have told him from the beginning. Hannah said she wanted to, but every time she tried, she became afraid. She had spent 17 years protecting herself from the people who wanted her silent. Then she accidentally contacted the brother of the man whose death had haunted her. At first, she thought she would apologize and disappear. But Lucas kept responding. He treated her with kindness when she expected judgment. He listened without demanding anything. And eventually, she fell in love with him. Lucas told her that love didn't erase deception. Hannah agreed. Then she said something that made Lucas stop. I didn't contact you because I wanted to use you. I contacted you because I didn't know how to live with what I knew. Lucas sat in silence. Part of him wanted to believe her. Another part of him wanted to hang up the phone and never hear her voice again. His brother's death had been the deepest wound in his family, and now the woman he loved was standing directly in the middle of it. He asked her for the name of the person she believed was responsible. Hannah refused. Lucas became frustrated and demanded an answer. Hannah told him that knowing the name would put him in danger. Lucas responded that he had already spent 17 years grieving without knowing the truth. He wasn't going to walk away now. The call ended shortly afterward. For the next 2 days, Hannah didn't contact him. Lucas barely slept. He went through every memory of their conversations, searching for clues he had ignored. He remembered how she avoided certain questions. He remembered her fear whenever he mentioned his family. He remembered the photograph she had sent. Then he began searching through his own family records. He pulled out old photographs, newspaper clippings, and documents his mother had kept after Philip's death. For years, they had been stored in a box Lucas rarely opened. He discovered something strange. The official report mentioned only one vehicle at the scene, yet Hannah claimed there had been another. Lucas searched through an old newspaper archive and found a small article published 2 days after the accident. It contained a detail he had never noticed before. A witness had reported seeing another vehicle near the crash, but the witness had never been identified. Lucas's hands began to shake. He continued searching. Then he found a name, Philip Harrison. The name appeared in a statement connected to the investigation. Lucas had no idea who Philip Harrison was, but Hannah had mentioned him once during an earlier conversation. She had described him as an older man who knew what happened that night. Lucas suddenly realized that the connection went deeper than he had imagined. He called Hannah again. This time, she answered immediately. Lucas told her about the name. There was a long silence. Then Hannah said, "You weren't supposed to find that." Lucas asked why. Hannah's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "Because Philip Harrison is the reason I disappeared." Lucas felt his stomach tighten. He asked what Philip Harrison had done. Hannah didn't answer. Instead, she said, "Lucas, listen to me carefully. Don't go looking for him. Don't call him. Don't tell anyone what we've discovered." Lucas asked why. Hannah replied with 5 words that changed the entire direction of the story. "Someone is watching you now." The call ended. Lucas immediately looked toward the window. His house was dark and quiet, but across the street, parked beneath a tree, was a black vehicle he didn't recognize. He watched it for several seconds. Then the headlights turned on, and slowly, the vehicle began moving toward his house. Lucas Miller didn't move as the black vehicle slowly passed his house. The headlights briefly illuminated the living room before disappearing down the Tennessee road. He stood by the window, watching until the vehicle was completely out of sight. For several minutes, he wondered whether he had imagined the entire thing. Then his phone vibrated. It was Hannah Reed. Her message contained only one sentence. "Please tell me you didn't speak to anyone about Philip Harrison." Lucas immediately replied that he hadn't. Hannah called him seconds later. Her voice was different now. There was no warmth, no teasing, no hesitation. She sounded genuinely frightened. Lucas asked whether the vehicle outside his house belonged to someone connected to Philip Harrison. Hannah said she couldn't be certain. Then she finally agreed to tell him the part of the story she had kept hidden for 17 years. She explained that after Philip Miller's accident, she had tried to cooperate with investigators. But shortly afterward, a man approached her and told her that continuing to talk about what she had seen would put her family in danger. Hannah told Lucas that the man never directly threatened her life. Instead, he knew details about her family that nobody outside her home should have known. He mentioned her mother's workplace. He knew where her younger sister attended school. He even knew the route Hannah took when driving home at night. That was when she realized someone had been watching her. She became terrified and withdrew her statement. Within weeks, she left Tennessee and began rebuilding her life somewhere else. She changed jobs, changed phone numbers, and avoided anyone connected to the accident. But she kept one thing with her, the photograph she had taken that night. She said she kept it because she couldn't bring herself to destroy the only evidence that might one day prove Philip's family had been given the wrong explanation. Lucas asked why she had returned to Tennessee after so many years. Hannah said she hadn't planned to. She had come back because her mother had become seriously ill, and returning home forced her to confront memories she had spent years trying to bury. Lucas understood something then. Hannah hadn't simply been running from the past. She had been carrying it. But there was still one question Lucas couldn't let go of. If Hannah had known who he was, why had she allowed their relationship to become so serious? Why had she let him fall in love with her? Hannah's answer was painful. She said that when their first conversation began, she had no idea the number belonged to Lucas. She truly believed it was someone else. But when Lucas introduced himself during their early conversations, she recognized his surname. She remembered Philip. She considered ending the conversation immediately. Instead, she kept talking because Lucas made her feel safe. For the first time in years, she could speak to someone without pretending everything was fine. Then something happened that neither of them expected. She fell in love with him. Hannah admitted that every time she considered telling him the truth, she imagined losing him. Eventually, fear became stronger than honesty. She knew that was wrong, and she understood why Lucas felt betrayed. Lucas told her that he didn't know whether he could forgive her. Hannah replied, "I don't expect you to forgive me tonight." Then she said something that broke through his anger. "But please don't let what happened to Philip become the reason you lose another person you love." Lucas didn't answer. That night, he couldn't sleep. He walked through his house thinking about everything Hannah had told him. He thought about Philip. He thought about his parents. He thought about the years his family had spent believing that a young man's death was simply a tragic accident. Then he thought about Hannah. Despite everything, he still cared about her. That was the part that confused him most. He could be furious with her and still want to know whether she was safe. He could feel betrayed and still miss hearing her voice. Love hadn't disappeared simply because the truth had become complicated. The next morning, Lucas made a decision. He would find out what really happened to Philip. He began by searching through old public records. One document led to another. Eventually, he discovered that Philip Harrison had been involved in a local business connected to the area where Philip Miller died. Harrison had also been questioned during the original investigation, but his involvement had never become part of the final report. Lucas found an old photograph of Harrison standing beside several local businessmen. In the background was a vehicle that looked remarkably similar to the one Hannah had described. Lucas saved the photograph and called Hannah. She didn't answer. He tried again. Nothing. Hours passed. Then, at 9:38 p.m., Lucas received a message from Hannah. "I am sorry." That was all. Lucas immediately called her. Her phone was switched off. He sent another message. No response. Then another. Still nothing. Lucas remembered the promise she had made him ask for when they first started talking. "Don't try to find me without my permission." But now she had disappeared. He couldn't simply sit at home. Lucas began driving through the Tennessee night, trying to reconstruct the locations Hannah had mentioned during their conversations. He remembered a small diner, a road near an old gas station, and a quiet town where she said she once lived. He checked each location, but Hannah was nowhere. Then he remembered something else. Months earlier, Hannah had casually mentioned a place she used to visit whenever she needed to think. It was an overlook outside town, where you could see the Tennessee countryside stretching into the distance. Lucas drove there. Hannah wasn't there, but something was waiting for him. A small envelope had been placed beneath a wooden bench. His name was written across the front. Lucas opened it with trembling hands. Inside was the original photograph Hannah had mentioned, but there was another photograph behind it. Lucas pulled it out. The second photograph showed Philip Miller standing beside a woman. Lucas recognized the woman immediately. It was Hannah, but the photograph wasn't from the night of the accident. It had been taken 3 days before Philip died. Lucas stared at it, unable to understand what he was seeing. Why had Philip known Hannah? Why had Hannah never mentioned knowing his brother before the accident? And why had she kept this photograph hidden for 17 years? Then Lucas noticed something written on the back. A handwritten sentence. "If anything happens to me, trust Hannah." Lucas's hands went cold. For years, Lucas had believed his brother died without leaving any explanation. Now he was holding a message that suggested Philip had known he was in danger before the accident happened. And Hannah had been part of that story from the beginning. Lucas called her again. This time, she answered. Her voice was barely audible. "Lucas, you found it." He asked what the photograph meant. Hannah began crying. She told him that Philip had contacted her shortly before his death because he had discovered something about Philip Harrison. Philip believed someone was using their business connections to hide serious wrongdoing. He wanted Hannah to help him expose it. She agreed. But before they could meet again, Philip died. Lucas asked why she had never told him. Hannah said she had been terrified. Then she told him the final truth. The night Philip died, he wasn't meeting me by accident. He was coming to give me evidence. Lucas closed his eyes. Everything suddenly connected. The wrong number. The photograph. The 17-year-old accident. Hannah's fear. Philip's warning. And the mysterious person watching Lucas. But before Lucas could ask another question, Hannah whispered something that made his heart stop. "Lucas, you need to leave that place." He asked why. She said, "Because you're not alone." Lucas slowly turned around. At the far end of the overlook, another vehicle had stopped. Its headlights were off. Someone was sitting inside, watching him. And then Lucas's phone received one final message from Hannah. "Run." Lucas Miller stood frozen at the Tennessee overlook, staring at the vehicle parked several yards away. Hannah's final message remained on his screen. Run. For a moment, fear took control of him. Then he heard the sound of an engine starting. The vehicle began moving. Lucas grabbed the envelope, the photographs, and hurried toward his truck. He didn't wait to see who was inside. As he drove away, his phone rang. It was Hannah. Lucas answered immediately and asked where she was. Hannah told him she was safe, but she had discovered that someone had been searching for the evidence Philip had left behind. She had deliberately stayed away from Lucas because she feared anyone watching her would eventually find him. Lucas asked why she had sent him to the overlook. Hannah said she needed him to see the photographs because she finally understood that keeping the truth hidden was no longer protecting anyone. 17 years of silence had only allowed the people responsible to believe they would never be held accountable. Lucas contacted an investigator he trusted and handed over everything Hannah had given him. The photographs were examined, old records were reopened, and the inconsistencies surrounding Philip's death were finally investigated again. What had once been dismissed as an ordinary accident suddenly contained unanswered questions that could no longer be ignored. Hannah provided her original statement and explained everything she remembered from that night. Lucas also turned over the handwritten message Philip had left behind. It wasn't enough to immediately prove what had happened, but it gave investigators a new direction. Slowly, pieces of the old case began falling into place. The second vehicle was identified. The connection to Philip Harrison became clearer, and the events surrounding Philip Miller's death were no longer being treated as a closed chapter. For Lucas, however, the investigation was only one part of the story. The other part was Hannah. He had every reason to walk away from her. She had hidden her identity, concealed her connection to Philip, and allowed him to develop feelings for her without telling him the truth. But Lucas also understood something he hadn't understood before. Hannah had spent 17 years carrying a burden that was never hers alone. She had lost her old life because she tried to tell the truth. She had lived with fear because she believed speaking could put people she loved in danger. And when she accidentally sent a message to Lucas, she had unknowingly contacted the one person whose family had been waiting 17 years for answers. Their relationship had begun with a mistake, but everything that followed had been real. Several weeks later, Lucas finally saw Hannah again. They met at the same quiet Tennessee diner where they had once planned to meet before everything changed. Lucas arrived first and sat near the window. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a phone, waiting for a message. He was waiting for a woman he had come to know through thousands of words and countless late-night conversations. When Hannah walked through the door, Lucas immediately recognized her. She looked nervous. She stopped several feet away, unsure whether she should come closer. Lucas stood. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Hannah quietly said, "I'm sorry." Lucas looked at her and told her that he was still angry. He was still hurt. But he also admitted that he had missed her every single day. Hannah began crying. Lucas walked toward her, and after 17 years of fear, secrets, and unanswered questions, they finally stood face to face. Their relationship didn't magically become perfect. There were difficult conversations ahead. Lucas had to learn how to trust Hannah again. Hannah had to learn how to stop expecting everyone she loved to disappear. They both understood that love wasn't enough to erase the past. It would take time. It would take honesty. And it would take a willingness to face the things they had spent years avoiding. But something important had changed. They no longer had to hide behind a phone. They could finally sit across from each other and speak honestly. Lucas told Hannah that the first message she had ever sent him was the strangest thing that had ever happened in his life. Hannah smiled and reminded him that she hadn't even meant to send it to him. Lucas laughed and said that maybe the wrong number had been the right mistake after all. Months later, the investigation into Philip Miller's death finally reached a conclusion. The evidence Hannah had preserved for 17 years helped investigators understand what had happened that night. People who had remained silent were questioned. Old records were examined, and the truth that had been buried for nearly 2 decades finally came to light. Lucas couldn't change what happened to his brother. Nothing could bring Philip back. But for the first time since that terrible night, his family no longer had to wonder whether they had been told the entire truth. Lucas visited Philip's grave alone one evening and stood there for several minutes. He told his brother everything that had happened. He told him about Hannah. He told him about the wrong number. And he told him that after 17 years, the truth had finally found its way home. When Lucas returned to his truck, he found Hannah waiting for him nearby. She didn't ask what he had said at the grave. She simply took his hand. They stood together in silence as the evening settled over Tennessee. Lucas realized that his life had changed because of a message that was never supposed to reach him. A stranger had typed a few desperate words into her phone, pressed send, and accidentally opened a door neither of them knew existed. Behind that door were grief, fear, secrets, betrayal, forgiveness, and eventually love. It wasn't the kind of love either of them had expected. It didn't arrive through a perfect introduction or a carefully planned meeting. It arrived when both of them were carrying wounds they believed nobody else could understand. And perhaps that was why it lasted. Because before Lucas knew Hannah's face, he knew her fears. Before he knew her history, he knew her heart. Before he ever held her hand, he had already listened to her through the loneliest nights of her life. Their relationship began with the wrong number, but it survived because the conversations that followed were real. And sometimes, life doesn't introduce us to the people who change us in the way we expect. Sometimes they arrive through an accident, sometimes through a mistake, sometimes through a message sent at 11:47 on a rainy Thursday night. Years later, Lucas would still remember that first message. I don't know what I'm going to do anymore. I think I've lost everything. He would remember how close he came to deleting it. He would remember how easy it would have been to ignore a stranger's pain. And he would remember the 6 words he sent back. I think you have the wrong number, but are you okay? Those words changed everything. Because the woman who had sent that message didn't lose everything. She found someone willing to listen. Lucas didn't lose his chance at love after his divorce. He found it in the most unexpected place. And the wrong number that was supposed to disappear into the night became the beginning of a relationship neither of them could have imagined. Sometimes, the most important moments in our lives don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly. A phone rings. A message appears. A stranger says hello. And without knowing it, 2 lives begin moving toward each other. For Lucas Miller and Hannah Reed, it started with a mistake. But in the end, it became the greatest love either of them had ever known. And perhaps that's the strangest lesson of all. Sometimes the wrong number can lead you to the right person.